You have spent hours, in some cases years, trying to make certain people understand you. You constructed the clearest possible version of your reasoning. You anticipated their objections and addressed them. You stayed patient when the conversation became circular. You offered more context, more evidence, more honesty than the situation probably required. And at the end of all of it, you were left with the same unresolved weight you started with, plus the additional exhaustion of having tried so hard to move something that was never going to move. That exhaustion is not a communication failure. It is information. Nietzsche wrote in Twilight of the Idols, published in 1889, that one of the most reliable signs of philosophical maturity is knowing when not to speak. Specifically, knowing which audiences render speech useless before it begins. He was not arguing for silence as retreat. He was arguing for precision, the recognition that explanation requires a counterpart capable of receiving it, and that offering your most honest account of yourself to someone structurally incapable of engaging with it is not generosity. It is waste. There are 5 types of people for whom explanation is always the wrong move. Not because you are above justifying yourself, but because with these specific people, the explanation will never accomplish what explanation is designed to do. If you have ever left a conversation feeling more misunderstood than when you entered it, give this video a like right now. Because what follows is going to change what you do next time you feel the pull to justify yourself to someone who has already decided. 1. The person who has already decided. Before the conversation begins, before you have said a single word in your own defense, this person has reached their conclusion. What they are waiting for when they ask you to explain yourself is not information. It is the performance of your attempt, the watching of you try, the cataloging of everything you say for later use, the experience of being in the position of someone who gets to evaluate while you justify. Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance, developed at Stanford in the 1950s, and among the most replicated findings in social psychology, established something that most people understand intuitively but rarely apply with sufficient rigor. The human mind does not process new information neutrally. It processes new information in relation to existing conclusions. And when the existing conclusion is strong enough, contradicting information is not absorbed. It is rejected, reframed, or simply not registered. What this means in practice is that explaining yourself to someone who has already decided is not a communication problem you can solve with better communication. It is a structural problem. The architecture of their position does not have a door that your explanation can open. Every piece of information you provide gets processed through a system that was built to confirm what they already believe, which means your clearest, most honest account of yourself becomes, in their hands, further evidence for the conclusion they reached before you started speaking. Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, described this as one of the primary features of what he called the closed type. The person whose relationship to ideas and to other people is fundamentally defensive rather than exploratory. They are not in the conversation to learn something. They are in the conversation to protect something. And your explanation, however carefully constructed, is a threat to what they are protecting, not an offering they can receive. 2. The person who uses your words as weapons. You know this one not from how the conversation begins, but from how it ends, and from what happens in the days and weeks after it. You explain your reasoning honestly. You disclose something real about your thinking, your fears, your motivations, and later, in a different context, with a different audience, or in a future conflict, that disclosure reappears, stripped of context, reframed, weaponized into something that no longer resembles what you said, but is recognizable enough that you can't fully deny it. Jennifer Freed at the University of Oregon documented a pattern she called DARVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. as one of the most consistent features of relationships in which one person's honest self-disclosure is systematically used against them. The mechanism is not always conscious. Sometimes the person doing it genuinely does not recognize that they are converting your vulnerability into ammunition. But the effect on you is the same regardless of their level of awareness. You learn, slowly and through accumulated evidence, that honesty with this person carries a specific cost that honesty is not supposed to carry. The result is that you begin self-censoring in ways you don't fully acknowledge, choosing words not for their accuracy, but for their safety, editing your account of yourself before it leaves your mouth, performing a version of explanation that reveals nothing essential because everything essential has been demonstrated, over time, to be unsafe. Nietzsche would have named this with particular sharpness in On the Genealogy of Morality. He wrote about the specific psychology of people who cannot engage with another person's strength directly and so engage with their disclosures instead, collecting vulnerabilities the way others collect arguments, building a case from the inside out. The person who uses your words as weapons is not interested in understanding you. They are interested in having access to you. And explanation gives them that access without the accountability that genuine understanding would require. 3. The person who mistakes explanation for permission. This is the most subtle of the 5, and the one most likely to be someone you genuinely care about. When you explain yourself to this person, something specific happens, and the explanation is received not as information about your reasoning, but as an opening for negotiation. You said why you made the decision. They heard an invitation to discuss whether the decision should stand. The explanation, in their processing of it, becomes the beginning of a conversation about whether you are allowed to do what you have already decided to do. What follows is a particular kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion of defending a conclusion that you are not, in fact, asking permission for. You explained because you thought explanation was a form of respect, a way of including someone in your thinking rather than simply presenting them with outcomes. But the person who mistakes explanation for permission does not experience it as respect. They experience it as consultation, and consultation implies that their input could change the result. Epictetus, in the Enchiridion, made a distinction that maps directly onto this dynamic. The difference between what is in your power and what is not. Your decisions, your reasoning, your direction. These are yours. The moment you submit them for approval to someone who has not been appointed to approve them, you have introduced a confusion about jurisdiction that will cost you every time. Nietzsche's version of this appears throughout Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The repeated recognition that Zarathustra's deepest errors come not when he keeps his counsel, but when he explains himself to people who were never equipped to receive what he was actually saying. The explanation is not taken for what it was. It is taken for what they needed it to be. And what they needed it to be was an opening. Think about a decision you've made recently, something you knew was right, and then explain to someone who responded by making you defend it. Comment below. My decisions don't require a jury. Just that, because the person who needs that sentence knows exactly why. 4. The person performing victimhood as a permanent position. You recognize this person because every conversation, regardless of how it begins, finds its way back to the same destination, their suffering, their injustice, their grievance. And when you attempt to explain yourself in any context that touches on that suffering, the explanation is not evaluated. It is absorbed into the narrative. Your reasoning becomes evidence of how little you understand what they've been through. Your perspective becomes proof of the position you occupy relative to theirs. Your attempt to be understood becomes, in the structure of the conversation, an act of aggression against someone who was already wounded. Nietzsche's concept of resentment from On the Genealogy of Morality is the most precise framework for understanding what is happening here. Resentment, as he described it, is not simply bitterness. It is a complete reorientation of identity around injury. The person living inside resentment has organized their sense of self so thoroughly around what has been done to them that any challenge to that narrative, including a straightforward explanation of your own reasoning, is experienced as an attack on who they are. This means explanation with this person is not just ineffective, it is actively counterproductive. Every word you offer in your own defense becomes more material for the case they are building. The more clearly you articulate your position, the more clearly you reveal, from inside their framework, the extent of your failure to grasp the depth of theirs. You cannot win an argument whose terms were set before you arrived and whose outcome was determined by the same event. Nietzsche's warning here is not to dismiss suffering. It is to recognize when suffering has become a structure rather than an experience. When it is no longer something a person is moving through, but something they are living inside permanently, and from which they have no interest in being dislodged because the position it grants them is too valuable to surrender. 5. The person who only respects what they cannot fully access. This is the one that takes the longest to understand, because it runs counter to everything most people have been taught about transparency, authenticity, and the value of letting people in. There are people for whom your willingness to explain yourself is not received as openness. It is received as ordinariness. The mystery that made you interesting, the self-possession that made you worth engaging with, the sense that there was more to you than the surface. All of it dissolves the moment you begin justifying, accounting for yourself, demonstrating that you too require their understanding in order to feel secure. Goffman's analysis of social interaction documented what he called the information game, the continuous, largely unconscious negotiation over who knows what about whom, and how that distribution of knowledge shapes the power dynamics of any relationship. What he found across a wide range of social contexts is that the person who controls what is known about them controls a great deal more than information. They control the terms of engagement. Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, described this with characteristic directness. Depth in human beings, as in ideas, is partly constituted by what remains unrevealed. The person who explains everything has, by definition, revealed the bottom, and once the bottom is visible, the depth is gone, replaced by the slightly disappointing recognition that this, after all, was the whole thing. This does not mean concealment. It does not mean performance. It means recognizing that certain people are drawn to you because of what they cannot fully read in you, and that the moment you begin anxiously translating yourself into terms they can easily process, you have eliminated the very quality that made the relationship worth having. This channel exists outside the algorithm. No sponsorships, no brand deals, just research, writing, and the belief that ideas sharp enough to change how you see yourself are worth protecting. If this has given you language for something you've been doing without understanding why it keeps failing, consider supporting this work directly through the link in the description. Every contribution keeps this independent, and that independence is what makes this kind of clarity possible. Now the part that requires the most honesty. Because across these 5 types, there is a thread that belongs to you, not to them. The compulsion to explain yourself is not simply a social reflex. For most people, it runs deeper than that. It is connected to something that was formed early. The experience of being misunderstood in contexts where being misunderstood had real consequences, and the subsequent conclusion that if you could only find the right words, the right framing, the right level of clarity and openness, the misunderstanding could be prevented. That conclusion is not wrong in every context. There are people and situations where explanation works, where offering your honest account of yourself produces genuine understanding and genuine connection. The skill is not in deciding never to explain. It is in identifying, before you invest the energy, whether the person across from you is actually capable of receiving what you're about to give. Nietzsche's most practically applicable philosophical contribution may be this. The examined life requires examining not just your own interior, but the specific quality of the audiences you are performing it for. Your honesty is a resource. Your self-disclosure is a resource. Your willingness to be understood requires a counterpart who is willing to understand. And that willingness is not something you can produce in another person by explaining yourself more clearly or more generously. Some people will understand you. They will do it without requiring you to justify your existence to them first. They will engage with your reasoning not to find its weaknesses, but to find its shape. They will receive your honesty as the thing it actually is, a form of trust, rather than as a vulnerability to catalogue or a permission slip to evaluate. Those are the people worth explaining yourself to. And one of the most useful things you can develop is the capacity to tell the difference before the conversation costs you something you won't easily recover. 2 questions for the comments. First, which of these 5 types has taken the most from you? The one whose need for your explanation has cost you the most energy across the most time. Second, what would change in your life if you simply stopped explaining yourself to people who were never going to receive it? Leave it below. The specific answers are the ones worth reading. And if this kind of examination, the honest, precise look at what your energy is actually going toward and whether it deserves it, is work you want to continue, subscribe. Because the next video takes this further in a direction that is directly connected to what this one opened. Not everyone who asks for your explanation deserves your truth. Learning the difference is not coldness, it is clarity.